Dobro, mi bi začeli z molitvijo, pa vas vabim, če lahko vstanete k molitvi. Dragi naš nebeški Oče, hvala ti za to priložnost, da smo lahko danes skupaj in da lahko premišljujemo o tem, kako živeti življenje skladno s tvojimi nameni za nas. Gospod, ti nas blagoslovi pri razumevanju tega, o čemer bo tekla beseda in predvsem pri uporabi teh stvari v našem vsakdanjem življenju. Hvala ti za vse, kar nam želiš dati in vse to s hvaležnostjo seveda sprejemamo. Amen.
Well, thank you for coming out on a Sunday morning.
Hvala, ker ste se odzvali v nedeljo zjutraj.
That's very courageous of you.
Zelo pogumno od vas.
And I feel very honored you would give up your Sunday morning lie-in to come and listen.
In počutim se počaščena, da ste se odrekli mogoče malo daljšemu ležanju v postelji v nedeljo zjutraj in prišli sem.
But this is a hugely important topic, isn't it?
Ampak to je izjemno pomembna tematika.
So, every one of us has experienced conflict, right?
Vsakdo od nas je že doživel konflikt.
You cannot be human and not experience conflict.
Ne morete biti človek in ne doživeti konflikta.
And so, we're going to cover some of these topics.
In pokrili bomo danes nekatere od teh tem.
First thing is, conflict is normal.
Prva je ta, da je konflikt normalen.
It can actually be useful when we manage it well.
Lahko je celo uporaben, če z njim pravilno upravljamo.
And we're going to look at some different ways, different styles of conflict that we experience.
Ogledali pa si bomo tudi različne stile konfliktov oziroma kako ga doživljamo.
And then we'll look at how to be peacemakers, how important that is.
Potem si bomo ogledali to, kako pomembno je biti mirotvorec, prizadevati si za mir.
And some danger signs, the things that we do wrong in conflict, which makes things worse.
In nekatera znamenja nevarnosti, stvari, ki jih delamo narobe v konfliktih, ki vse skupaj še poslabšajo.
And we'll look at some really useful tools that will de-escalate or even lower the incidence of conflict.
Potem si bomo gledali orodja za deeskalacijo konflikta oziroma pomiritev.
And I'll give you some useful tips and skills.
Dala vam bom nekaj uporabnih nasvetov.
And then we'll talk about how we manage conflict in wider groups, not just one-to-one.
In potem se bomo pogovarjali še o tem, kako upravljati s konflikti v širših skupinah, torej ne samo v medosebnih odnosih.
So, conflict is normal.
Torej, konflikt je normalen.
It's not a problem if we have a different opinion to somebody else.
Ni težava, če imamo različno mnenje od nekoga drugega.
Because we're all different. We need to have different opinions.
Ker smo vsi različni in zato potrebujemo različna mnenja.
And when we have different opinions, it's an opportunity to understand each other better.
In ko imamo različna mnenja, je to tudi priložnost, da bolje razumemo drug drugega.
But most often we don't do that.
Ampak najpogosteje tega ne počnemo.
We defend our position
Branimo naš položaj,
rather than listening to the other person.
namesto da bi poslušali drugo osebo.
And when you get two people who are defending themselves, it tends to turn into a less nice conflict.
In ko imate dve osebi, ki branita vsaka svoj položaj, potem se to razvija v ne tako prijeten konflikt.
So the goal of conflict is to help us explore our differences so we can find a good collaborative solution where possible.
Cilj konflikta je torej, da nam pomaga raziskati naša stališča, tako da pridemo do ugodnih rešitev težave, s katero se soočamo.
So conflict is just a sign, as I said, that we're human and different.
Konflikt je samo znamenje tega, da smo ljudje in da smo različni.
And we're different as human beings in so many ways.
In različni smo na številne načine.
In fact, my husband and I are totally opposites in personality.
Kar se tiče osebnosti, sva z možem popolnoma različna.
When he was thinking about marrying me,
Ko je on razmišljal o tem, da bi se poročil z menoj,
he was doing pastoral psychology at Newbold.
je študiral pastoralno psihologijo na Newboldu
And so he got from his tutor a personality test.
in od svojega tutorja je dobil test osebnosti.
And he said, "Hey, Karen, take this test."
In je rekel, hej, Karen, naredi ta test.
And he took it to his tutor.
In ga potem odnesel svojemu tutorju.
And it's like, "Can you tell me, like, is she normal?"
In je rekel, mi lahko poveš, a je ona normalna?
He hadn't known me very long, actually.
Takrat me ni poznal dolgo časa še.
And his tutor said, yes, she's perfectly normal,
In je njegov tutor rekel, je, popolnoma je normalna,
but she's the opposite normal to you.
ampak je nasprotno normalna od tebe.
So over the years, we've had to learn how to negotiate these vastly different personalities.
Z leti se je torej treba naučiti, kako se pogajati glede teh zelo različnih osebnosti.
And there were times it drove us crazy.
In občasno nas to seveda pripelje do točke norosti.
But we learn to appreciate our differences and see them as strengths for our relationship.
Ampak naučila sva se ceniti najne razlike in na nje gledati kot na močne točke najnega odnosa.
Because the more different we are, the more gifts we have to help the
Ker
relationship.
bolj različni kot smo, več darov različnih prinašamo v naš odnos.
There's an Englishman who said this quote.
En Anglež je izrekel te besede.
You can just say it.
Zamisel, da dve osebi lahko živita skupaj 25 let, ne da bi med njima prišlo do resnega prepira, nakazuje na pomanjkanje duha, kar lahko občudujemo edino pri ovcah.
So you can see, it's impossible to live together with another human being without having some kind of conflict.
Nemogoče je živeti skupaj z drugim človeškim bitjem, ne da bi prišlo do neke vrste konflikta.
So there are different ways in which we do conflict.
So različni načini, kako se lotevamo konfliktov.
And it's important to understand what these are.
In pomembno je razumeti te stile.
Because when you understand the different ways that conflict happens,
Ker ko razumete različne načine, na katere pride do konflikta, se ta zgodi,
you can perhaps find your way out of one that doesn't feel so good.
lahko najdete pot iz vsega tega.
So we see on the left side there's an arrow about self-interest.
Na levi strani vidite eno puščico, ki govori o lastnih interesih,
That's getting what you want.
torej dobiti tisto, kar želite.
And on the bottom there's a line that is taking care of the relationship more.
Na spodnjem delu te preglednice pa je puščica, ki govori o odnosih.
And so we can see this creates a grid
Vidimo, da to ustvarja eno mrežo
with different kinds of styles.
z različnimi stili.
The directing, controlling style,
Torej imamo ukazovalni ali nadzorovalni stil,
the avoiding one,
stil izogibanja,
the harmonizing one,
stil harmoniziranja,
the compromising one,
kompromis
and the cooperative or collaborative one.
in sodelovanje.
And that's what we're really aiming for when we can.
In k temu težimo, kadarkoli lahko.
So what happens in the controlling one?
Kaj se dogaja v tem prvem stilu ukazovanja?
So one person wants their way,
Ena oseba želi doseči svoje
and they really demand that their way is the only way.
in trdi, zahteva, da je njena pot edina prava pot.
And if you don't do what they say, it's not going to be great for you.
In če ne naredite tega, kar ta oseba želi, ne bo dobro za vas.
And the benefits of this in certain situations like work is there's a quick decision and you just do it.
V določenih primerih so lahko tudi neke prednosti, recimo kot na delovnem mestu, hitro pridete do odločitve in potem to izpeljete.
You don't ask any questions.
Ne sprašujete veliko.
And there's sometimes this is really useful
Včasih je to lahko uporabno,
with a small child.
pri majhnem otroku recimo.
And you just, in certain situations, you just have to be the one in control
In v določenih situacijah seveda kot starši preprosto morate imeti nadzor,
to keep them safe.
zato da otroci ostanejo varni.
But if this is the dominant style of conflict in an adult relationship, this can have problems.
Če pa je to prevladujoči stil konfliktov pri odnosih med odraslimi osebami, to povzroča težave.
Because the more the person who is controlling gets their way, the more they want it.
Večkrat kot oseba, ki ukazuje, ki nadzoruje, dobi tisto, kar hoče,
Or the more they expect it.
ali pa več kot pričakuje.
And the other person starts to feel resentful.
Druga oseba začne čutiti zamero,
They don't trust the other person.
ne zaupa več,
They don't really want to cooperate.
ne želi sodelovati.
And it usually leads to anger in the person who doesn't have a say.
In običajno pripelje to do jeze pri osebi, ki nima besede.
Then there's an avoiding style.
Potem imamo stil izogibanja.
We just don't talk about it.
O tem ne govorimo.
So nothing gets fixed.
Nič se ne uredi.
We both lose.
Oba izgubiva.
People are silent, awkward, avoidant.
Ljudje so tiho, mučno je, izogibajo se,
They feel really stuck.
Preprosto čutijo, da so obtičali v nekem odnosu.
And it avoids an angry confrontation.
S tem se izognemo jeznemu spopadu, konfliktu,
But it can lead to increasingly cold isolation.
ampak vse to pripelje do vedno hladnejše izolacije.
My grandparents lived like this for 50 years.
Moji stari starši so 50 let živeli s tem.
When I went to see them, I would visit my grandfather in one room and my grandmother in another room.
Kadar sem jih šla obiskat, sem obiskala svojega dedka v eni sobi in mojo babico v drugi sobi.
And they would each count the minutes I spent with the other.
In vsak je štel minute, ki sem jih preživela z drugim.
And woe betide, one of them would win because I spent more time with one than the other.
In pol je bilo tako, kot da en bo zdaj zmagal, ker sem bila več časa z njim.
Then there's harmonizing.
Potem imamo stil harmoniziranja.
And that's when someone will let the other person win and choose to lose because they don't really mind that much.
Ko se ena oseba preprosto odloči, da bo izgubila, da dovoli drugi osebi, da pač ima, kar želi.
Or they might do it for the sake of the relationship.
Lahko to naredi zaradi odnosa.
And they just decide, you know, this thing, it's not worth arguing about.
In preprosto rečejo, tej stvari se ni vredno prepirati.
And there's a general peace.
In tako nastane nek splošni mir.
And there's some grace and generosity on behalf of the one who chooses to lose.
Strani tega, ki se odloči izgubiti, je izkazana milost, velikodušnost.
But if this goes on for a long time, the relationship can feel unbalanced.
Ampak če se to dogaja dlje časa, potem v tem odnosu ni ravnovesja.
And the person who wins can just expect they'll win every time.
In oseba, ki zmaga, pričakuje, da bo to vedno tako.
And after a while, the person who loses starts to feel resentful again.
In čez čas oseba, ki izgubi, začne biti nezadovoljna.
Then we have compromising, which we often think is a good idea.
Potem imamo stil kompromisa, za katerega mislimo, da je dobra ideja.
And it is a good thing to do, to compromise, to come up with a solution.
In je dobro vsekakor najti neko kompromisno rešitev.
And some people will say, well, you can win a few and I'll win a few.
In imate ljudi, ki rečejo, nekaj dobiš ti, nekaj dobim jaz.
There's understanding, there's a bit of give and take.
Imamo razumevanje, odnos daj dam.
But it needs to be balanced.
Ampak to mora biti v ravnovesju.
When we just say, well, you win some and I'll win some, we don't really win together.
Ko rečemo, ti nekaj dobiš, jaz nekaj dobim, to pomeni, da ne dobiva oba skupaj nečesa.
And then someone can say, well, you know what, you've won the last 3, it's my turn now, whatever the situation.
In potem lahko nekdo reče, veš kaj, ti si prejšnje 3-krat dobil nekaj, zdaj sem jaz na vrsti, da dobim.
Then there is cooperating or collaborating.
Potem pa imamo še sodelovanje.
This is, let's both win.
To je stil oba zmagava.
And that does take compromise on each person's part, but they both find a solution they want.
Seveda to zahteva kompromis pri obeh osebah, ampak skupaj najdeta rešitev, ki deluje.
And this takes a bit of time because you have to listen to each other and work out some good solutions.
Zato je potrebno nekaj časa, zato ker morate poslušati drug drugega, priti do dobrih rešitev.
But it develops an understanding of the other, some empathy, some creativity to find a solution.
Ampak razvije se ustvarjalnost pri iskanju rešitev, empatija.
But it can also be time consuming to deal with every issue in this way.
Lahko pa seveda zahteva to zelo veliko časa, če se z vsako stvarjo ukvarjamo na ta način.
Gary Chapman, who wrote The 5 Love Languages,
Gary Chapman, ki je napisal knjigo 5 jezikov ljubezni,
has written a really good book called Everybody Wins.
je napisal še eno zelo dobro knjigo z naslovom Vsak zmaga.
And you can read this and learn about how to do it.
In v tej knjigi lahko preberete, kako se lotevati konfliktov na ta način.
And for example, he talks about a couple who wanted to paint their bathroom.
In govori recimo o enem paru, ki je želel prebarvati kopalnico.
And he wanted to have some grey in there, and she wanted to have it white and pure and minimalist.
On je želel imeti nekaj sive barve, ona vse čisto belo, minimalistično.
And then together they worked out a way to put both colours in there, to have some grey but also keep it
Potem
minimal.
sta iskala pot in način, kako obe barvi združiti in imeti eno in drugo.
So it's not all grey and it's not all white.
Ni vse sivo, ni vse belo.
So, you know, you can be creative with that.
Tako da pri takšnih rešitvah smo lahko ustvarjalni.
But that that takes each person to talk, to explain, and to say, okay, now what can we do with everything you want and everything I want to find something we want?
Ampak za to je potrebno torej pogovarjati se, iskati rešitev, ki jo želi en in ki jo želi drugi.
So in the Bible it tells us that blessed are the peacemakers.
Svetopismo nam pravi, da so blagoslovljeni tisti, ki delajo za mir.
Blessed are all of you because you want to be peacemakers. You've come here to learn.
Blagoslovljeni ste vsi vi, ki ste prišli sem, ker želite delati za mir, se učiti.
And Jesus says they will be called the children of God.
In Jezus pravi, ti bodo imenovani Božji otroci.
And I think that's because God is the greatest peacemaker in the universe.
In mislim, da je to zato, ker je Bog največji mirotvorec v vsem vesolju.
And as Adventists we understand he's resolving like the hugest conflict ever.
In kot adventisti razumemo, da Bog razrešuje največji konflikt, ki je kadarkoli obstajal.
And when we can bring peace wherever we are, then we are the children of God.
Ko lahko prinesemo mir tja, kjerkoli že smo Božji otroci.
Even if it's a small peacemaking between two arguing siblings.
Čeprav gre za mir med dvema sorojencema, ki se prepirata.
So why is it important for us here to be peacemakers?
Zakaj je pomembno, da si prizadevamo za mir?
It's because when we don't resolve conflicts, relationships get hurt, they get broken.
Zato, ker če ne razrešimo konfliktov, pride do prekinitve odnosov.
When research was done by the Adventist Church on why people left the church,
Ko je bila v adventistični cerkvi narejena raziskava o tem, zakaj ljudje zapuščajo cerkev,
60% of the people cited conflict as their first reason.
je 60% ljudi omenilo konflikt kot razlog številka 1.
It could be a conflict that was going on in the church and they were just observing it.
Lahko je to bil konflikt, ki se je odvijal v cerkvi, pa so ga samo opazovali
And they got tired of it.
in se utrudili.
Maybe someone had a conflict with them personally.
Mogoče je kdo bil osebno z njimi v konfliktu.
Maybe there was a conflict in their own home and they just felt they couldn't come to church for a while and then they just left.
Mogoče je šlo za konflikt v njihovem domu, pa so mislili, da ne morejo nekaj časa prihajati v cerkev in so potem preprosto odšli.
And when they asked people their second reason for leaving the church,
Ko so vprašali ljudi po drugem razlogu, zaradi katerega zapuščajo cerkev,
about 30% said it was conflict.
30% omenja spet konflikt.
And when they asked what their third reason was,
In kaj je tretji razlog, najpogostejši?
30% said conflict.
Prav tako 30%
So we can
pravi
see it's
konflikt.
one of the biggest reasons why people leave the church.
Torej, gre dejansko za enega največjih razlogov, zakaj ljudje zapuščajo cerkev.
It's not usually about beliefs and doctrines.
Običajno sploh ne gre za verovanja, prepričanja in podobno,
It's about relationships.
ampak odnose.
So relationship breakdown affects people's mental, spiritual health.
Prekinitev odnosov vpliva na mentalno in pa duhovno zdravje ljudi.
And conflict management can just take all the energy out of us. If you've ever had to deal with a difficult conflict,
In upravljanje s konflikti seveda nam lahko odzame vso energijo
and it often distracts us from our true mission as a church.
in nas pogosto odvrača od našega resničnega poslanstva, ki ga imamo kot cerkev.
Because how can we have the energy to take God's love into this world and create a kind church when we're in such conflict?
Ker kako bi lahko imeli energijo za to, da Božjo ljubezen odnesemo v ta svet, ko pa se ukvarjamo s konflikti in ne moremo biti prijazna, ljubeča cerkev.
And as I've been part of churches for many years now, my husband is a pastor,
Več let sem del cerkve, moj mož je pastor,
and as a family therapist and a psychologist,
in kot družinska terapeutka in psihologinja
I see that many of the deep conflicts around go back to deep personal issues that people have.
vidim, da se veliko konfliktov pravzaprav obada z različnimi globokimi osebnimi vprašanji.
And when I look at the fruit of the Spirit, these are all antidotes, opposites to things that tend to cause conflict in
In
our
ko
lives.
pogledamo sad duha, vidimo, da so vse to nasprotja od tistega, kar opazimo v konfliktih.
So think about a conflict that's around you somewhere,
Razmišljajte recimo o nekem konfliktu, ki je v vaši okolici,
that you're connected with,
s katerim ste povezani,
and then think, where am I on the scale of like pride to humility?
in razmišljajte o tem, kje sem jaz na lestvici med dvema skrajnostima, ponos in ponižnost.
Selfishly wanting what I want rather than generously helping others.
Sebično pričakujem tisto, kar jaz želim, ali ponujam velikodušno drugim.
Being critical of others rather than accepting of them.
Ali sem kritičen ali pa sprejemam osebo.
Being kind to others or hurting them or not being kind.
Sem grob ali prijazen.
Needing to be in control or being willing to compromise.
Imam potrebo po nadzoru ali imam zmožnost sklepati kompromise.
Because often, if we really look at it, deep down in a conflict, we might be struggling with one of these things.
Ker ko pogosto pogledamo na konflikte, vidimo, da se nekje globoko v sebi borimo s temi stvarmi.
And we need to ask, why is this so important to me?
In moramo se vprašati, zakaj mi je to tako pomembno?
Why is it so important to the other person?
Zakaj je tako pomembno drugi osebi?
And what's really bothering me in my heart when I'm in this conflict? What is it that I really want and need?
In kaj me resnično skrbi, ko sem v tem konfliktu? Kaj res potrebujem?
So I want you to pause for a moment.
Želim si zdaj, da naredimo eno pauzo za nekaj trenutkov.
And I hope you have some Bibles.
Upam, da imate kakšno sveto pismo ali vsaj telefon, s katerim boste
Yeah,
dostopali
true.
do njega.
I want you to look at Romans 12,
Poglejte si Rimljanom 12. poglavje,
9 to 18.
od 9. do 18. vrstice.
And just, it's very simple because it's very clear.
Zelo preprosto je ta naloga, ker je jasno besedilo.
But this was actually Paul's instructions for creating healthy communities and relationships.
To so pravzaprav Pavlova navodila za ustvarjanje zdravih skupnosti in odnosov.
So read those verses together.
Preberite skupaj to besedilo, te vrstice.
And then in a few moments I'll ask you to tell me one of the points you learnt from there that will help to reduce conflict.
In čez nekaj trenutkov vas bom vprašala po kakšni stvari, ki ste jo videli v tem besedilu in vam pomaga pri zmanjševanju konfliktov.
And contribute to healthy relationships.
In prispeva k zdravim odnosom.
So we'll give you a few minutes for that.
Torej, nekaj minut vam damo časa za to, po 2-3 osebi skupaj se pogovorite o tem besedilu.
If you feel a bit stuck, read it in a modern version because it can help you.
Če besedilo poznate, mogoče v enem prevodu, samo berite ga v nekem drugem, še vam lahko pomaga kdaj pri tem, kakšnem jezikovno sodobnejšem prevodu.
Okay, so you've read through those verses, there's just a few of them.
Upam, da ste prebrali te vrstice, njih veliko.
And what I like is this whole chapter from Paul is really key about healthy relationships.
Tisto, kar mi je všeč, je pravzaprav, da gre za poglavje, ki je celotno posvečeno zdravim odnosom.
He starts by reminding us that we're all part of a body. We're all connected.
Pavel nas spominja najprej na to, da smo vsi del telesa in da smo med seboj povezani.
And because we're all part of a body, we want to help look after every part of the body.
In ker smo vsi del telesa, si želimo skrbeti za vse druge dele telesa.
And then he talks about the spiritual gifts.
Pavel govori tudi o duhovnih darovih potem.
Basically, we're all different.
Pravi, da smo vsi različni.
And we all bring different things into the body of Christ.
In da vsi prinašamo v Kristusovo telo različne stvari.
Because we're different parts of the body and we're differently gifted.
Ker smo različni deli telesa in ker imamo različne darove.
But Paul knows because of that we're going to have some challenges with relationships.
Pavel ve, da bomo zaradi tega imeli določene izzive v naših odnosih.
And so he gives some really lovely instructions on how to do that well.
In zato daje lepa navodila o tem, kako lahko živimo skupaj.
So tell us some of the ideas that you found there, the tips for healthy relationships.
Podelite z nami kakšen nasvet, ki ste ga našli v tem besedilu, ki bo pomagal pri odnosih.
Always do good. That's a good one.
Ja, vedno delajte dobro. Ja.
So be kind.
Bodite prijazni. Dober. Patience.
Be patient. Yes, that's important. Be patient with others.
Bodite potrpežljivi z drugimi. So respect each other more than
That's
yourself.
really important. Respect.
Spoštovanje, ja.
Thank you. Sorry? Not everything
Ne
is
vrti
about
se vse okrog nas. Ja.
Yes. Thank you.
So every action should be a decision of a person such.
So there's all kinds of good things there, and I think it's something we can go back to look at again and again to remind us.
Imamo različne dobre nasvete, ki si jih lahko vedno znova ogledujemo, se vračamo k njim in nas spominja na to, kaj narediti.
So the Bible is full of ideas like this. Every time it says do this for one another, those are things that will help reduce conflict.
Sveto pismo je polno takšnih nasvetov in vsakič, ko beremo nekaj, kar naj bi naredili drug za drugega ali drug drugemu, je to nekaj, kar zmanjšuje konflikte.
So he says this, be devoted to one another in love.
Tukaj imamo nekaj stvari iz tega besedila. Bodite predani, ljubezni drug do drugega.
Respect each other.
Tekmujte v medsebojnem spoštovanju.
Live harmoniously with each other.
Živite v miru z vsemi.
And in harmony, there are different songs, but they work together.
Pri harmonijah, harmoničnosti imamo različne pesmi, ki pa lepo delujejo skupaj.
And don't be proud or conceited.
Ne bodite ponosni niti domišljavi.
Okay, now I'm going to do something really weird.
Zdaj bomo naredili nekaj čudnega.
I'm going to have a really bad argument.
Imela bom res en slab prepir.
A really nasty one.
Res hudoben.
With my husband.
Z mojim možem.
But he's not here.
Ampak njega ni tukaj.
So I will take both parts.
Zato bom jaz prevzela obe vloge.
So we've been having rather a lot of potatoes in our meals.
V najnih obrokih sva imela veliko krompirja.
And it's dinner time.
In čas večerje.
And I put some potatoes on the table.
In jaz dam na mizo krompir.
And this is my husband here and me here. I'll try and remember.
Zdaj moj mož je tu, jaz sem tu, sem poskušala zapomniti.
Not potatoes again.
Pravi, ne spet krompir.
We've had them every meal for the past 3 days.
Vsak obrok zadnje 3 dni je bil krompir.
Potato waffles, potato pancakes.
Krompirjevi vafli, palačinke.
Potato soup, potato curry.
Krompirjeva juha, krompirjev curry.
I'm just fed up with potatoes.
Dovolj mi je krompirja.
Can't you cook anything else?
A ne znaš skuhati nič drugega?
Of course I can. Don't be so stupid.
Seveda znam, ne bodi tako neumni.
You know we don't always eat potatoes.
Se veš, da ne jemo vedno krompirja.
So just stop complaining and get on with it.
In nehaj se pritoževati njej.
But I'm fed up with eating all these potatoes.
Ampak meni je dovolj vsega tega krompirja.
It's boring.
Dolgočasno je.
Can't you make something else for a change?
Ne moreš narediti nekaj drugega za spremembo?
Don't blame me.
Je rekel, ne krivi mene.
You're the one who brought 2 big sacks for €4.
Ti si prinesel 2 veliki vreči za 4 evre.
So it's all my fault, is it? All my fault that you are cooking potatoes for every meal?
Vse je moja krivda, vse to sem jaz kriv, da kuhaš krompir vsak obrok.
Yes, it's completely all your fault.
To je vse tvoja krivda, ja.
So just eat them and stop moaning.
Zato pa pojej to in se nehaj pritoževati.
Why is everything bad always my fault and never yours?
Zakaj je vse slabo vedno moja krivda, nikoli tvoja?
Interesting question.
Zanimivo vprašanje.
Let me see.
Naj vidim.
Well, you were the one who bought all those potatoes to save money.
Ti si bil tisti, ki je kupil ves ta krompir, da bi prihranil.
And now they're sprouting like crazy in the
In
garage.
zdaj pa ta krompir enostavno začne pošiljati kalčke ven kot
And
nor.
I'm trying to use them up before they stink.
In moram ga uporabiti, preden zasmrdi.
Well, I think eating potatoes at every meal stinks too.
Pravi, jaz mislim, da jesti krompir pri vsakem obroku tudi smrdi.
What crazy person would do that? I'm sick to death of them.
Katera neumna oseba bi to naredila? Ne? Dovolj mi je tega.
Good, because I'm not crazy about cooking them.
Pravi, dobro, ker jaz ne kuham rada krompirja.
They're muddy and disgusting.
Krompir je tako sluzav in ogaben.
And they're hard work.
In težko delo.
I have to scrub them and dig their eyes out and peel them.
Treba ga je olupiti, očistiti, izrezati vse tiste oči.
I never want to see another potato for the rest of my life.
Nikoli več ne želim videti krompirja do konca življenja.
Well, it's your fault I bought the potatoes in the first place.
Ti si kriva, da sem kupil ves ta krompir.
I'm only trying to economize because you went and bought another dress.
Poskušal sem biti ekonomičen, ker si ti si kupila drugo obleko.
A new dress?
Nova obleka.
I paid €3 for it in a charity shop.
3 evre sem dala za njo v trgovini z rabljenimi
And you
oblačili.
blame me for overspending?
In mene kriviš za to, ker potrošim preveč.
You've always been mean with your money.
Vedno si bil zloben s svojim denarjem.
I'm tired of saving every penny.
In sita sem, da moram vedno gledati na vsak cent.
think it's your mother's fault.
Mislim, da je to krivda tvoje mame.
She still thinks she's living through the Second World War.
Ona še vedno misli, da živi v drugi svetovni vojni.
And so do you.
In ti tudi.
She brought you up to be so careful with money that we have to be miserable all the time.
Ona te je vzgojila, da si tako škrt glede denarja, da je vedno slabo vse.
Well, I have to be careful with money because you spend so much.
Jaz moram paziti na denar, ker ti preveč trošiš.
If I didn't try to economize, we'd be bankrupt and starving and homeless.
Če ne bi jaz bil varčen, bi bankrotirala, bi stradala in bila brezdomca.
And it would be all your fault.
In vse bi bila tvoja krivda.
Well, if we are ever starving and homeless, you'll be all right.
Pravim, če bomo kdaj lačna, stradala in brezdomca, bo tebi v redu.
You can go back home to your German mother.
Ker lahko greš nazaj domov k svoji nemški mami.
And she will take care of you.
In ona bo poskrbela za tebe.
And I bet she will never serve you potatoes.
In prepričana sem, da ti nikoli ne bo dala krompirja za jesti.
Eat your own potatoes. I'm going to McDonald's.
Je rekel, ti pojej svoj krompir, jaz grem McDonald's.
I bet he has a large fries.
Ja, upam, da bo kupil veliki pomfri.
So, little argument in the Holford home.
Majhen prepir v domu Holfordovih.
Fortunately, we've never had one quite that bad.
Ni se zgodil nikoli na tako slab način.
Some of them got close.
Ampak nekateri so bili blizu.
So tell me, what did I do? What was wrong in that argument? What were we doing wrong?
Povejte mi, kaj je bilo narobe v tem prepiru, kaj sva delala narobe? You were attacking each other?
Yes, we were attacking each other.
Ja, napadala sva drug
Nastily.
Ja.
Začetek je bil tak, da namesto da bi razložila pač te stvari, pač malo krompir, malo ga porabiti, si veš, razumeš, ne, je že začela jaz nisi.
So the beginning was already started with the blaming, you know, not explaining why we have so much potato. Or
So yeah, blaming it is not a great thing. Yeah. Blaming is a dangerous thing.
Torej, krivljenje nekoga ni dobra stvar, je nevarna stvar.
Because once you blame someone, they will feel defensive and they will start attacking.
Kadar krivite, ne padate nekoga, se bo ta začel braniti.
And then we just...
In potem imamo napadanje z obeh strani.
And each time we find a bigger weapon.
In vsakič najdete seveda večje orožje.
Vlekla se je naprej, kako bi rekla, v mama, pa za odlečiti, kaj se
So it started small and just grew with various questions, dress, mother and everything.
So we start with a little balance, and then someone puts something on the scales, and then someone tries to make their argument stronger, and so on.
Začeli smo kot z eno malo vago, ne, v ravnovesju, potem pa vsak dodaja nekaj na eno stran in poskušamo ves čas to izenačiti. Ne. So in the background were obviously some unresolved issues that you have not talked about, but just putting them into the conflict. And
You're right.
ja,
Some big
drži.
issues like finances,
Nekatera velika vprašanja, kot so finance, odnosi.
yes, that's important.
Ja, to je
And
pomembno.
we've been ignoring them.
In to sva prezirala. So you were not looking for a solution.
We weren't looking for a solution. No. I'll help you think about what we did later. Or you can help me think about that later.
Ja, potem, kasneje bomo govorili še o tem, kaj sva pravzaprav počela.
Any other ideas?
Še kakšne zamisli?
So basically there was a little smoldering fire at the beginning,
Na začetku smo imeli mogoče majhen tleč ogenj
and we kept throwing logs on to make the fire bigger.
in potem sva na ta ogenj metala drva, da je bil vse večji.
So how can we be fire extinguishers?
Torej, kako smo lahko aparat za gašenje ognja?
Avoid saying you never, you always.
Izogibajte se posploševanju, torej ne govorite ti nikoli ali ti vedno.
Because the other person will always think of some time when they did or didn't.
Ker druga oseba se bo res vedno spomnila primera, ko je to naredila, kar pravite.
And they will argue about that.
In potem se boste kregali glede
So it's almost guaranteed to trigger someone's
Torej,
reaction.
takšna izjava bo izvala reakcijo drugega.
Blaming the other person,
Ne
which was
krivite
said,
druge osebe,
it's all your fault.
vse je tvoja krivda, ti si kriv.
Usually it's something we've done together that's made this issue.
Običajno je nekaj, kar smo naredili skupaj, kar je ustvarilo problem.
We exaggerate small things.
Običajno pretiravamo glede malih stvari,
So many plate of potatoes.
torej krompir, ne, in
And then we do this archaeology.
In potem se ukvarjamo z arheologijo.
We dig around for a bit of juicy history.
Izkopavamo sočno preteklost.
Things from the past that we can add to the problem now.
Stvari iz preteklosti, ki jih lahko dodamo sedanjim težavam.
That we clearly didn't deal with in the past when we should have.
Stvari, s katerimi se nismo ukvarjali v preteklosti, ko bi se morali.
So it helps if we just deal with what are we dealing with now.
Zato pomaga, če se ukvarjate samo z vprašanjem, o čem zdaj govoriva.
And then we insult or criticize the other person and or their family.
Potem žalimo ali kritiziramo drugo osebo in seveda vse sorodstvo zraven.
And that goes really deep to the heart.
To seže res globoko v srce.
And then we may walk away without any explanation.
Lahko pa tudi preprosto odidemo brez vsakega pojasnila.
And there's a time to walk away.
Je čas, ko je treba oditi.
And if you need to calm down,
če se morate pomiriti.
just say, you know what, I need to take a few minutes to calm down.
Potem rečite, rabim nekaj minut, da se pomirim.
Because I realize that my emotions are quite strong right now.
Ker zavedam se, da imam zelo močna čustva glede tega.
And I don't want to do or say anything I'm going to regret.
In ne želim narediti ali reči nekaj, kar bom kasneje obžaloval.
So I'm just going to go out for a walk and I will be back in 15 minutes. Say when you will come back and where you are going.
Grem samo na kratek sprehod, čez 15 minut sem nazaj in se pogovoriva o tem.
Because if you go out the door and the other person does not know where you're gone and when you are coming back, they will be so anxious.
Ker če preprosto greste skozi vrata in druga oseba ne ve, nekam greste, nekdaj se boste vrnili nazaj, to ustvarja izjemno napetost, tesnobo.
So when you do come back, all the fear has also built up on their distress and they're in a worse place.
In ko se potem v resnici vrnete, imate nakopičen strah na vse pritiske, ki so, in to je najslabša.
And you might be
možna
fine.
situacija.
You might have calmed down and you're fine now, but you've left the other person in a worse state.
Vi se lahko v tem času pomirite in je vse ok z vami, ampak drugo osebo ste pustili v najslabšem stanju.
So there's so a lady has done some research on conflict in couples.
Gospa je naredila raziskavo o konfliktih in parih.
And the reason we do a lot of research on couple conflict is that they have a long-term relationship usually.
Zakaj delamo veliko raziskav v povezavi s konflikti na parih? Zato, ker gre za dolgoročen odnos.
And we can learn a lot from how they manage to resolve their conflicts.
In ker se lahko veliko naučimo iz tega, kako upravljajo z konflikti.
So this lady called Sue Johnson studied 25 years of videos of couple arguments.
Ta gospa Sue Johnson je preučevala videoposnetke 25 let različnih konfliktov med pari.
Can't think of a worse thing to do for your life, but anyway.
Ne vem, ali se bi lahko spomnila kako hujšo stvar, ki bi jo počela v življenju, kot gledala to.
But the amazing thing is she spotted some things that were very important.
Ampak tisto, kar je osupljivo, je, da je prepoznala določene stvari, ki so pomembne.
It didn't take her long to realize that they weren't usually arguing about what they're arguing about.
Ni bilo potrebno veliko časa, da je prepoznala, da se pravzaprav ne prepirajo o stvarih, o katerih mislijo, da se prepirajo.
If you think about the argument about the potatoes,
Če pomislite na ta prepir glede krompirja,
some of these big questions are under that conflict.
so v njem skrita ta pomembna vprašanja.
The big question under it was, do you really love me?
Veliko pomembno vprašanje za vsem tem je bilo, me imaš rad?
And when people live in relationships where they don't know if they're really loved,
In ko ljudje živijo v odnosih, kjer ne vedo, ali so resnično ljubljeni,
they're more likely to have a conflict.
potem je verjetnost konflikta večja.
Something in their heart is so desperate, they want to elicit a positive reaction from the other.
Nekaj v njihovem srcu je tako velika potreba, da si želijo pozitiven odziv.
And when the other person does something that doesn't feel caring, they really get very distressed.
In potem, ko ne dobijo nečesa, kar pokaže skrb, naklonjenost druge osebe, se ta pritisk poveča.
So in the argument about the potatoes, neither of us feel really cared for.
V tem prepiru o krompirju ni bilo poskrbljeno za nobenega od naju.
The other question is, do you really understand what I'm going through right now? Can you empathize with me?
Drugo vprašanje, ali res razumeš, skozi kaj grem zdaj, kaj zdaj doživljam, ali lahko sočustvuješ z menoj.
Are you willing to help me when I'm struggling? Will you bear my burdens with me?
Si mi pripravljen pomagati, ko se borim, boš nosil skupaj z menoj moja bremena.
And Can I always depend on you? Will you always be there for me?
In ali mi boš zmeraj na voljo, se lahko zanesem na te.
Are you committed to me?
Ali si mi predan.
And actually, when we answer those questions in our everyday caring relationships,
In ko odgovorimo na ta vprašanja v tistih vsakodnevnih odnosih, skrbi, bližnjih odnosih, torej,
whether in our homes or in our churches or communities,
v naših domovih ali v naših cerkvah, skupnostih,
then we will have a lot less arguments.
potem bomo imeli veliko manj konfliktov.
We won't eliminate the conflict,
Ne bomo jih izbrisali,
but we'll lower the incidence of it.
ampak znižali bomo pogostost njihovega pojavljanja.
And when they do happen, they are easier to manage.
In ko se pojavijo, je lažje ravnati, se odzivati na njih.
Because there's like a cycle of distress.
Ker obstaja en cikel stiske.
So if someone is feeling distressed
Če nekdo čuti v sebi to stisko
or unloved,
ali čuti, da ni ljubljen,
then they start to, they go into fight or flight mode.
se takšna oseba pripravi do položaja, ko ali se bori ali zbeži.
And the stress hormones kick in.
In stresni hormoni se pojavijo.
And when someone's feeling like that and another person triggers an argument, they're ready to fight.
In ko se nekdo počuti tako in zdaj neka druga oseba sproži konflikt, so pripravljeni na boj.
And when we get into the state that we don't know any other way than to fight,
Ko pridemo do stanja, ko ne vidimo druge poti razen boja,
the brain doesn't let us engage with our empathy.
se naši možgani ne morejo ukvarjati z empatijo.
It's almost like a shutter comes down,
Kot da se spusti roleta
and the body is about self-preservation in that moment.
in telo je v stanju samoohranitve,
It senses risk.
čuti ogroženost
So it will behave in quite nasty ways.
in zato se odziva na zelo neprijetne načine.
And then that triggers the other person.
To pa seveda potem spodbudi drugo osebo.
When they get stressed,
Ta oseba je zdaj pod stresom,
and their empathy shuts off,
njihova empatija je izključena
and you have a potato argument.
in potem imate prepir o krompirju.
But if one person can respond calmly and caringly to the other
Ampak če se ena oseba lahko ljubeče odzove, skrbno odzove
and says something kind and caring,
in reče nekaj prijaznega,
it can calm the other person down from their stressed state
potem lahko to pomiri drugo osebo v tem stanju, v katerem je.
and help them to re-engage with an empathic, calm state
In
too.
ji pomaga, da tudi sama pride v to mirno, empatično stanje.
So we need to realize what's happening in their brain, what's happening in my brain.
Moramo se torej zavedati, kaj se dogaja v možganih druge osebe, kaj se dogaja v naših možganih.
And if you can see that someone is already stressed and ready to fight,
In če vidite, da je nekdo pod pritiskom in pripravljen boriti se,
the Bible says a gentle answer turns away wrath.
Sveto pismo pravi, da mil odgovor pomirja togot.
Because that's how our brains are wired.
Ker tako naši možgani delujejo.
When someone else shows care, understanding, support, commitment,
Ker ko nekdo pokaže skrb, razumevanje, predanost,
we feel safe.
se počutimo varne.
And we can go back into that empathy, caring state.
In potem se lahko vrnemo nazaj v tisto stanje empatičnosti in skrbi za drugega.
And when we live in ways that answer these questions well, we help people stay in this state of oxytocin relationship, warm, caring relationship.
Živimo v takšnem torej stanju, kot ta vprašanja nakazujejo, potem ljudem pomagamo, da živijo v stanju hormona oksitocina, ki je hormon dobrega počutja.
So if someone's distressed, don't add to their distress.
Torej, če je nekdo v neki stiski pod stresom, ne vstopajte v to,
Choose to respond in a calm, caring way.
ampak se odzovite na miren in ljubeč način.
And if you find yourself getting stressed,
In če boste ugotovili, da ste sami v takšnem stanju pritiska,
recognize that.
prepoznajte to,
Take some deep breaths.
globoko zajamite sapo,
Think about something that makes you feel loved,
pomislite na nekaj, kar vam daje občutek, da ste ljubljeni
and you can calm down.
in lahko se boste pomirili.
I often breathe like I'm blowing bubbles.
Jaz pogosto takrat diham, kot da piham mehurčke.
And you can do that. If you breathe 3 times as if you're blowing bubbles, a deep breath in,
Če zadihate 3-krat, kot da pihate mehurčke, torej globok vdih in počasni izdih,
and then watch the imaginary bubbles
in
floating.
gledate te imaginarne mehurčke, kako odhajajo.
If I do that 3 times, I really calm down.
Če jaz to naredim 3-krat, se pomirim.
Whether I'm frightened or scared or stressed.
Ne glede na to, ali sem prestrašen, ali sem pod stresom, ali karkoli drugo.
Before I'm going to talk to a lot of people,
Preden bom govorila veliko ljudem,
then it really helps me to calm.
takrat mi to pomaga pri
So,
pomiritvi.
things we can do to lower conflict in our relationships and be proactive
Stvari, ki jih lahko naredimo, da zmanjšamo število konfliktov v naših odnosih, da smo proaktivni,
is do something kind for the other people even when you don't feel like it.
je, da naredimo nekaj prijaznega za druge ljudi, tudi takrat, ko nismo razpoloženi za to.
So the more kind things we do for those in our home, the less they will argue with us.
Več prijaznosti, kot pokažemo ljudem v našem domu, manj se bomo z njimi prepirali.
Why? Because you are activating the oxytocin in their brain.
Zakaj? Zato, ker v njihovih možganih aktiviramo izločanje oksitocina.
And when that's there, they're less argumentative.
In ko se to dogaja, so manj prepiralno razpoloženi.
Take care of other people's emotions.
Poskrbite za čustva drugih ljudi.
In Romans 12 it says, be sad with those who are sad and happy with those who are happy.
V Rimljanom 12 beremo, da naj se veselimo s tistimi, ki se veselijo in jočemo s tistimi, ki jočejo.
Be aware of other people's emotions and respond appropriately to them.
Zavedajte se čustev drugih ljudi in se pravilno odzovite na nje.
These are 2 of my grandchildren on a good day.
To sta moja 2 vnuka, ko imate dober dan.
So say thank you as often as you can,
Recite hvala, kolikor pogosto lahko.
because the more appreciated we feel in a relationship, the less you will argue with people.
Ker bolj kot se čutimo cenjene v nekem odnosu, manj se bomo prepirali.
So just drop the little gratitudes there wherever you can or in a text.
Izrazite hvaležnost, kadarkoli lahko, napišite sporočila.
These things work for teenagers too, if you have
Te
teenagers.
stvari delujejo tudi pri najstnikih, če jih imate.
It's important to be aware of their brains, and they need this even more than adults do.
Pomembno je zavedati se njihovih možganov in delovanja njihovega še bolj kot pri nas odraslih.
And help each other.
In pomagajte drug drugemu.
Bear one another's burdens.
Nosite bremena drug drugemu.
Because, again, this will lower the resentment and conflict.
Ker to zmanjša zamere in konflikte.
One of the biggest conflicts that comes to me as a couple therapist
Eden od najpogostejših konfliktov, s katerimi se srečujem kot zakonska svetovalka,
is when one person feels they're doing all the work,
je takrat, ko ena oseba čuti, da opravlja vse delo,
while the other person sits and watches telly.
druga oseba pa samo sedi in gleda televizijo.
And the resentment really builds up then.
In potem se v njih seveda nakopiči ena zamera in nezadovoljstvo.
I met a really charming Greek gentleman, an Adventist retired pastor.
Srečala sem enega res šarmantnega grškega gospoda, upokojenega adventističnega pastorja.
Bernie and I found out that in that culture there's a very strong difference between male and female roles in the home.
In z Bernijem sva ugotovila, da v njihovi kulturi obstajajo zelo jasne meje med vlogami za moške in ženske.
So when Bernie talked about helping me around the house,
Ko je Bernie govoril o tem, da mi pomaga doma po hiši pri opravilih,
the men in our marriage weekend group said, we don't need to listen to him.
in je potem ta rekel, njega ne bomo poslušali.
But this elderly Greek gentleman said this really special thing.
Ampak ta starejši grški gospod je rekel nekaj posebnega.
He said, if I lived alone, I would have to do all my cooking and cleaning and washing and etc.
Če bi živel sam, potem bi moral vsa svoja opravila, torej kuhanje, pomivanje, pranje perila,
And so why not share that with my wife?
opravljati sam. Zakaj tega ne bi potem delil s svojo ženo?
And he was about 90 at the time.
Takrat, ko je to rekel, je bil star 90 let.
And he was telling all the young couples, you do this.
In potem je govoril tem mladim parom,
It will help
delajte
your love more
to.
than you know.
To vam bo koristilo v ljubezni bolj, kot se zavedate.
So when we argue, the problem is often not the problem, not the person.
Ko se prepiramo, ko imamo konflikt, potem težava pogosto ni oseba.
So it can help to see this issue that we're arguing about as something between us here,
Zato nam pomaga, če je to, o čemer se prepiramo, vidimo kot nekaj, kar je med nami.
And it's a problem because we are different, each of us, and we contribute to this space in the middle.
Da je to težava, ker smo oba različna in ker oba prispevava k temu prostoru, ki je v sredini.
The problem is not in you or me,
Težava ni v tebi ali v meni,
it's in the space between us.
ampak v prostoru med nama.
Because I could be in another relationship and this that I want would not be a problem.
Ker jaz lahko sem v nekem drugem odnosu tudi in ta ista stvar v tem odnosu ni težava.
So let's look at this and see how we can negotiate this together.
Zato si poglejmo to in vidimo, kako se lahko o tem pogovorimo.
So, and then look at the other person. They are also made in the image of God. They are a child of God.
In na drugo osebo gledajte kot na osebo, ki je ustvarjena po Božji podobi, ki je Božji otrok.
They have their own struggles and needs and hopes and background.
Osebo, ki ima svoje bitke, svoje vprašanja, svoje ozadje, iz katerega prihaja.
And then look at this problem.
In potem gledajte na to težavo, ki je vmes.
What effect is this having on our relationship?
In se vprašajte, kakšen učinek ima ta težava na naš odnos.
How dare it do that to us?
How?
How dare it do that to us?
Kako to vpliva torej na nas? Kaj nam naredi?
How can we tame it?
Kako lahko to nekako umirimo, omejimo?
You can even imagine it's a little monster that's trying to push you apart.
Lahko si to predstavljate kot eno malo pošast, ki vas poskuša odriniti enega od drugega.
And how can we work together to make it smaller?
In se vprašate, kako lahko to zmanjšamo vse skupaj.
And when have we been good at doing that? Is there a time when we've actually managed this problem well?
In dobro je takrat seveda, ko lahko dobro upravljamo z težavo.
And if we did, what were we doing that we can do again?
In če sva to težavo že imela in je uspešno rešila, kaj sva takrat naredila in kaj lahko ponoviva?
Is there a time when I've given Bernie potatoes for a whole week and he hasn't minded?
Ali je bil čas, ko sem mogoče Bernieju servirala krompir cel vikend, pa mu je bilo vseeno?
Because maybe I've been more loving and kind to him.
Mogoče zaradi tega, ker sem bila zelo prijazna in ljubeča do njega.
And what happens is when we're loving and kind to a person,
In to, kar se dogaja, da kadar smo ljubeči in prijazni do druge osebe,
and they do something that annoys us,
in ta oseba naredi nekaj, kar nas zmoti,
if they've been loving and kind to us, we go, we're just having a bad day.
pa če je ta oseba ljubeča in prijazna do nas, rečemo pač ima slab dan.
We say in English, we give them the benefit of the doubt.
V angleščini torej rečemo, da jim omogočimo jim, da kaj?
Don't be a word for it. But we see it more generously if we feel this is
Bolj
love.
milostno, bolj usmiljeno gledamo na njih.
But if they've been really annoying us and hurting us,
Ampak če ta oseba recimo res nadležna
and then they do the same thing,
in naredi to isto stvar,
we're ready to fight.
potem smo pripravljeni na boj.
Because we already have the cortisol and adrenaline in our brains.
Ker v naših možganih sta že kortizol in adrenalin in smo.
But if we have the warm oxytocin, we look at them more generously.
Ampak če imamo oksitocin, potem gledamo bolj velikodušno na drugo osebo.
So, and then count the cost. What effect has this conflict had on our relationship?
Potem preračunajte stroške, vprašajte se, kakšen učinek ima ta konflikt na najin odnos.
What effect does arguing about the potatoes have on me and have on Bernie?
Kakšen učinek ima prepir o krompirju name in na Bernija?
How is it affecting our spirituality, our happiness, our health?
Kako vpliva na najino srečo, na najino zdravje?
How have we let a sack of potatoes do this to us?
Kako lahko dovoliva, da ena vreča krompirja to počne z nama?
So it helps us to see things a bit differently.
To nam pomaga, da stvari vidimo iz druge perspektive.
So insecurity can fuel conflicts.
Negotovost lahko spodbudi konflikte.
If you're in a committed relationship, express your commitment.
Če ste v enem predanem odnosu, potem izrazite to predanost.
You know, I'm always here for you. I will always love you.
Vedno sem tukaj zate, vedno bom tukaj zate, vedno te bom imel rad.
Yes, it doesn't go perfect all the time, but know that I really want to be with you. I always want to be with you.
Res je, ni vedno popolno, ampak želim si biti s teboj, vedno biti s teboj.
I'm glad I married you, and it's normal to have these ups and downs, and we'll get through it.
Vesel sem, da sva se poročila in normalno je, da imamo vzpone in padce.
But if someone threatens to leave even casually and they don't mean it,
Ampak če nekdo tako mimogrede grozi, da bo odšel,
or they don't talk to you for 3
pa
weeks,
morda ne misli to ali se ne pogovarja z vami 3 tedne,
or they disappear for a night and you don't know where they
ali
are,
pa preprosto izgine, pa ne veste, kje je,
then that's going to make people feel more uncertain.
potem so to stvari, ki prinašajo negotovost.
Perfect love casts out fear,
Popolna ljubezen izganja strah.
and fear is one of the big fuels of conflict.
Strah pa je eno od močnih goril za konflikte.
So the interesting thing is that when couples come to me,
Zanimivo je, da ko pari pridejo k meni,
if they're already in a troubled relationship
če so v odnosu, ki ima težave
and they have an argument,
in pride do prepira,
they can come into my room and describe that argument word for word.
lahko pridejo v mojo sobo in mi ta prepir opišejo dobesedno, besedo za besedo.
He said, she said, he did, she did.
On je rekel, ona je rekla, on je naredil, ona je naredila.
My husband and I have a good relationship, I'm glad to say.
Z možem imava dober odnos in z veseljem to povem.
So once we learn how to live with each other as normal,
Ko sva se naučila živeti z normalnostjo drug drugega,
and we make sure we put lots of oxytocin into the relationship.
se trudiva seveda čim več oksitocina spraviti v odnos.
And yes, we will have little conflicts about things.
Da, imava male konflikte okrog različnih stvari.
And when we're doing this seminar to marriage retreat,
Kadar pa imava seminarje na recimo programih za zakonce,
Bernie always says, you know what, we need to think of a conflict, an example of a conflict we've had recently.
in mi Bernie pravi, veš kaj, morava se spomniti nekega konflikta, ki sva ga nedavno imela, kot primera.
And we know we've had them,
In veva, da sva imela konflikte,
but the next day we can't even remember them.
ampak naslednji dan se tega ne spominjava.
But when people are living in stress, adrenaline helps them remember every detail of their pain.
Ko pa ljudje živijo v stresu, jim ta adrenalin pomaga, da se spomnijo vsake podrobnosti svoje bolečine.
So another principle in dealing with conflict is be flexible.
Še eden od principov pri ravnanju s konflikti je bodite prilagodljivi.
When we're flexible about what we want, we're less likely to break something.
Ko ste prilagodljivi glede tega, kaj želite, obstaja manjša verjetnost, da boste kaj polomili.
What's the worst thing that could happen if you try someone else's idea for
Kaj
a
je
while?
najslabša stvar, ki se lahko zgodi, če boste poskušali nekaj časa izvajati idejo druge osebe?
Does it have to be your way?
Ali mora biti tako, kot vi pravite?
Why not try the other person's way
Zakaj ne poskušati tako, kot pravi druga oseba?
or find a way in between?
Ali poiskati neko srednjo pot?
And if you feel you can't be flexible on something, think why.
In če čutite, da glede nečesa ne morete biti prilagodljivi, se vprašajte, zakaj.
Have you had a painful past experience that's left you traumatized?
Ste mogoče imeli bolečo izkušnjo v preteklosti, ki vam je povzročila travmo?
Are you afraid of something?
Se bojite česa?
Do you just want to be in control?
Si preprosto želite nadzor?
Or will it not hurt for you to be flexible?
Ali pa vas bi prizadelo, če bi bili fleksibilni, povzročilo škodo?
So I'm going to give you an opportunity to be flexible,
Zdaj vam dala priložnost, da boste prilagodljivi.
and I'll give you a 10-minute break
To je 10-minutni odmor,
to go and bend
tako da se lahko malo
and move around
raztegnete, priklonite, karkoli
and experience some physical flexibility.
in dobite malo telesne prilagodljivosti.
So go and take a break.
Torej 10-minutni odmor.